It's been well publicized in MOLA's newsletter, Marcato, and through personal anecdotes, that a significant perk of interning with Clint is the inclusion of his fine dining forays. And given Clint's reputation as a gourmet, it's no surprise that the conclusion of the Philadelphia Conference marked the beginning of the banquet tradition. After the downtown meetings ended, the librarians arranged, in typical organized fashion, carpools to transport them from city center, Philadelphia, to Clint's 1710 residence in Glenside, Pennsylvania. They arrived to find the home engulfed in a catered Pennsylvania Dutch buffet, paid for entirely by Clint. Among the approximately 40 dishes were sauerbraten mit gravy, red beet eggs, and shoe-fly pie, which rested on every available space, from tables to the washing machine to a ledge above the sink. From then on, a meeting was held once a year, each time in a different city. 1984 saw the doubling of conference duration from 1 day to 2, as 27 librarians gathered in Boston. Discussions continued from that meeting in Philadelphia, and Mary Judge, principal librarian, Cincinnati Symphony, and also MOLA's first secretary-treasurer and its 9th president, compiled the first repertoire list. This report grew from an idea she presented in 1983 about a central clearinghouse to correlate the programs of MOLA orchestras in such a way that librarians could easily discern duplication of repertoire and guest conductors around the country. Mary paid for this project out of her own pocket. Later, Ron Whitaker, past president and principal librarian of the Cleveland Orchestra, would become involved in the compilation and distribution of the annual report. At the suggestion of Victor Albert, the group was named Major Orchestra Librarians Association, or MOLA. Larry Tarlow used this meeting to draft and present the first MOLA bylaws, which were ratified the following April at the conference in New York. Officers were elected and rules written down, and in July of that year, the first edition of Marcato, a type and paste job by Paul Gunther, principal librarian of the Minnesota Orchestra and two-time MOLA president, was circulated to the members. Marcato was created to keep the librarians informed of telephone and address updates and to pass on tidbits of information that might be helpful in the months between the annual conferences. During the first decade, this mass mailing was the most efficient way to reach the entire membership at once. In the first few years, MOLA managed to publish Marcato sporadically, once going 18 months without an update. But the Philadelphia Orchestra assistant librarian Nancy Bradford took over in August of 1988 and began the clockwork quarterly mailings to which we are now all accustomed. Nancy's perfectionism drove her to spend hours checking facts and ensuring that everything was correct, and her efforts resulted in a longer and more informative publication with regular columns, personal updates on members, and titled errata lists. She edited the newsletter for 5 years, and by the time she handed it over to the next literary aspirant, it was established as an integral part of the organization. Around the mid-1990s, when Al Gore's Internet began its ascent toward ubiquity, MOLA's membership exploded. This expansion, the result of an effort made by the board to include smaller budget orchestras, music festivals, and educational institutions, was facilitated by the new easy communication. Email messages replaced faxes, and members were able to reach each other quickly and effortlessly. The MOLA website helped to connect the growing international network. Stu Serio, the librarian for the Naples Philharmonic, now with the Fleischer Collection, launched the site so that it was operated by the Houston Conference in April of 1998. And when Stu left Naples, Pat Swick, with the Utah Symphony, now retired, took over site maintenance, adding as an offspring the MOLA listserv, converted later to the MOLA Forum. The MOLA site grew to include membership lists, scanned brochures, and in the past 5 or 6 years, errata lists. Before the digitization of these lists, thanks Russ Gersberger, the Philadelphia Orchestra librarians copied and faxed or mailed them upon request to librarians all over the globe. It was a time-consuming task, and at the St. Petersburg, Florida conference, Clint reported that 168 requests had been filled that season. These days, the auspicious title of webmaster is held by Steve Sherrill with the Atlanta Symphony, who continues to update and expand the site's resources. In 1991, the U.S. Marine Band joined, leading the way for other military ensembles. 1992 saw the first membership of orchestras from outside North America, and a year later, Kees Wiese of the Rotterdam Philharmonic was the first non-North American member to attend the annual conference. By 1997, orchestras from Australia, the Middle East, and Mexico joined for the fold, and the membership expanded to include conservatories, music schools, and concert bands. 6 years later, the Orquestra Sinfónica del Estado de São Paulo would lead the way for South America. And in 2004, the acceptance of the Cape Philharmonic in South Africa meant that all inhabited continents were represented, and many of their librarians familiar with the story of Clint's 1983 farmhouse dinner. The increased membership demanded greater administrative attention, and in 2001, under President Kazue MacGregor, principal librarian of the Los Angeles Philharmonic, the officers met for their first ever mid-year Board of Directors meeting. Before 2001, the board would meet only once a year, immediately before the annual conference. To catch up on everything at once, the meetings were often painful marathon sessions. In addition, as more business was added to the year-round agenda, it became necessary for officers to communicate more frequently. This first mid-year meeting and subsequent ones came about largely through the toil and commitment of Bob Sutherland, principal librarian of the Metropolitan Opera and three-time MOLA president. In order to hold these mid-year meetings and continue to cover the costs of conferences and various ongoing projects, MOLA needed more money than the dues would bring in. Car washes were out after Clint's refusal to don a bikini and high heels, and the MOLA Mafia proposal was incompatible with the 1990s crime crackdown in New York City. Consequently, it became apparent to board after board that MOLA would have to seek donations. To complicate matters, the organization could not legally accept tax-deductible donations unless it was both incorporated and considered to be a charitable organization. Officially, incorporated signifies that the IRS has approved an applicant's articles of incorporation, formal bylaws, and reviewed the usage of funds, and acknowledged a healthy amount of demonstrable charitable work. 501c3 tax status, which allows the designee to solicit tax-deductible donations, is a subset of this category and can only be applied for after an organization is incorporated. Unofficially, the terms mean that at least one member of the group has surrendered his personal life to an extensive application with enough pages of information to rival 100 Mahler symphonies. Although he's quick to point out that this was a long-term project with much participation from various boards, MOLA's martyr was Bob, possibly repressing pyromaniacal urges as the papers accumulated and the hours spread, all told over 10 years, from early ponderances of tax status to last-stage signatures by then-President Greg Vaught of the San Antonio Symphony for charitable standing. But the project was finished by October 1997, when MOLA was incorporated and officially a nonprofit corporation. As it was clear that the looming 2000 conference in New York, hosted jointly by the Metropolitan Opera and the New York Philharmonic, would be costly, Bob and co-host Larry Tarlow hit the streets to start fundraising. Armed with Karen Schnackenberg, principal librarian, Dallas Symphony, and serving her second term as MOLA president, and her Southwestern charm, the fearless conference hosts marched through Manhattan thoroughfares and took music publishers by storm. As Karen explains, 2000 was the first time we went to the publishers and asked them to support and collaborate with us in presenting the conference. Bob, Larry, and I went round in person, meeting with them in New York and sharing ideas on what was to be presented. The extensive presentation on digital issues with some of the leading publishing representatives at that conference really set the stage for the discussions at every conference on the issue since. In retrospect, it seems that these years were the ones during which MOLA came into its own, with its new tax status, its fundraising efforts, its website and listserv, and the influx of new members. MOLA enjoyed increased momentum. Marcia Farabee, principal librarian of the National Symphony and two-time MOLA president, helped initiate the MOLA Publisher Joint Committee, formalizing a working relationship with the publishers, which has continued to keep the lines of communication open between the librarians and publishers and improve the quality of service from both sides. Plans were on the books for the first non-North American conference, and its first board member from Europe, Jackie Compton from the London Philharmonic, served as member-at-large for 2 seasons.